Would you still stay if I had nothing to give? Then I'd stay for what's left. Because what's left is the part no one could take from you. The wind cut like iron filings through the pines that morning in the Arizona Territory near the New Mexico line. It was March 1st, 1872, and the high country had that raw, unforgiving bite that scraped a man's lungs and made the whole world feel hollow and distant. I was out checking the south fence line just like every dawn, the familiar rasp of wire against my gloves and the creak of saddle leather the only sounds keeping me company for months on end. Out here in this vast, silent land, repetition wasn't just habit, it was survival. You repeated the same motions day after day until they became something close to a prayer, a way to hold on to sanity when everything else threatened to slip away. The ground was still frozen in uneven patches, slick with the remnants of old snow melt that refused to give up its grip. My horse Buck snorted great clouds of steam that hung in the air like restless ghosts drifting between the weathered fence posts. Beyond the pasture, the river glimmered dull and swollen from days of mountain runoff, carrying the low, constant rumble of distant trouble. The peaks had been shedding their heavy winter blankets for 3 straight days, and every rancher in Dry Creek knew what that meant. The spring thaw was arriving early and angry, turning peaceful streams into raging beasts that could swallow a man whole without warning. I was tightening the last stretch of barbed wire, my fingers numb from the cold, when it happened, a sound that didn't belong to the natural rhythm of the land. It wasn't the sharp shriek of a hawk circling overhead, or the lonely yelp of a coyote in the distance. No, this was a human scream, thin and sharp, cutting through the roar of the river before being swallowed almost instantly. My first thought was that my mind was playing tricks again, the way it sometimes conjured echoes of cannon fire in the wind or the cries of fallen comrades on quiet nights. But then it came again, higher this time, more desperate, a voice that tore through the air and split something deep inside my chest wide open. By the time the echo faded into the pines, I was already moving, urging Buck down the steep drop toward the river. The terrain was rough, loose shales sliding under hooves, cottonwoods bending low under the force of the swollen current. There she was, a dark blur tangled among the branches of a fallen tree half submerged in the churning water. The river attacked her like a living thing, each surge pulling her closer to the depths with relentless hunger. She wasn't dressed like any settler woman I'd ever seen. Her buckskin dress, adorned with intricate beadwork that caught faint glimmers even through the spray, clung to her small frame. Her dark hair was plastered against her face, and she looked impossibly fragile against the power of the water. I didn't hesitate or stop to weigh the risks. I dropped my hat, unbuckled my gun belt, and kicked off my boots right there on the muddy bank. The water hit me like a blacksmith's hammer the moment I plunged in, so cold it stole the breath straight from my lungs and made my muscles seize. The current wrapped around my legs like iron chains, trying to drag me under and sweep me away downstream. I dug my hands into the rocky riverbed and kicked hard against the flow, eyes locked on the woman. She was caught halfway under the branches, one arm hooked desperately around a limb, her body jerking with every powerful pull of the river. Her lips had turned a frightening shade of blue, and her eyes were half closed, fighting to stay conscious. "Hold on!" I shouted, but the wind and water tore the words apart before they could reach her. She didn't respond. I dove under, the cold punching through me all the way to the bone. My fingers found her leg wedged tightly between 2 submerged limbs. It took every ounce of strength I had left to pry it free. When the branch finally snapped and gave way, she slipped toward the deeper current, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her close. The next minutes blurred into a frantic struggle of raw strength and sheer will. Waves crashed over us, filling my mouth with silt and cold. Somehow, We fought our way to the bank, half crawling, half clawing through the thick mud until we collapsed on solid ground. I lay there beside her, chest heaving, the roar of the river still thundering in my skull like distant artillery. She wasn't moving at first. I rolled her gently onto her side and pressed a hand to her neck. There was a pulse, faint but steady. Then she coughed violently, a harsh, scraping sound as she spat up river water. Her eyes fluttered open, a striking green-gray color, wild and frightened like an animal that had been running too long from unseen hunters. "Easy," I said, my voice low and rough from the cold. "You're safe now." She flinched at the sound of my voice and tried to push herself backward, but her arms trembled too much to support her. Where am I?" she managed, her voice cracking like thin ice. "Near Dry Creek on my ranch," I replied. Her gaze darted around in panic. "No town," she whispered urgently. "Please don't take me to town." I frowned, studying her face. "I'm not taking you anywhere you don't want to go. But you'll freeze out here if we stay." For a long moment, she simply stared at me, as if weighing the truth in my words or deciding whether I was the kind of man whose promises held weight. Finally, she gave a single, reluctant nod. I lifted her into my arms. She was lighter than a sack of feed, but the way her body went rigid told me she wasn't accustomed to gentle hands or kindness without strings attached. The trail back to my cabin was slow and treacherous, the sky turning to heavy iron gray that promised more sleet before full dark. Her head lolled against my shoulder, a few wet strands of her hair sticking to my neck. The cabin sat on higher ground, a squat, sturdy structure of logs and hard labor, built by a man who never expected visitors or comfort. I kicked the door open and carried her inside. The single room was plain and sparse. One cot, a rough-hewn table, a small stone hearth, and shelves holding basic supplies like coffee tins and dried jerky. The air smelled of damp pine and long solitude. I set her carefully in the chair closest to the fire, stripped a wet blanket from her shoulders, and draped a dry one over her. "Get those wet things off," I said, turning my back and busying myself with stacking kindlings slowly and deliberately. "There's enough privacy if I don't look." She didn't reply, but I heard the soft rustle of fabric behind me, mixed with trembling breaths of exhaustion and lingering fear. I poured 2 cups of strong coffee, adding a splash of whiskey to each for warmth. "This will chase the chill faster than the fire alone," I said, setting one mug beside her before retreating to the far wall to give her space. After a heavy silence, her voice came soft. "You are not afraid of me." I turned to meet her eyes. "If I was afraid, I wouldn't have pulled you from that river." She blinked, processing my words as if they were something unfamiliar and valuable. Her small, calloused hands wrapped tightly around the tin mug for warmth. "My name is Ta," she said at last. "Eli Mercer," I replied. "You're safe here, Ta." She didn't look entirely convinced. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. The firelight revealed a faded bruise along her cheek, a shadow that spoke of old troubles. I didn't press for details. A man learns when silence is kinder than questions. Outside, the wind keened through the pines, sharp and lonely. Inside, the quiet grew thick, almost tangible. Hours slipped by that way. I patched a worn saddle strap just to keep my hands occupied. She sat wrapped in the blanket, staring into the flames as if they might reveal what came next. When the storm intensified, sleet hissed against the window panes, and thunder rolled over the hills. She flinched with each boom. "You ought to rest," I told her. "The cot's yours. I'll take the floor." "I cannot pay," she whispered, her hands stilling. I didn't ask for payment. She looked up, something flickering in her eyes, disbelief mixed with cautious hope. Men always want something, she said quietly. I didn't argue. Instead, I added another log to the fire and laid down on the floor with my back to her, the hard boards cold even through my coat. For a long time, the only sounds were rain ticking on the roof and her shallow breathing. Then she spoke again, barely above a whisper. If I stay, will you not ask why? Not tonight, I answered. You're too tired to tell your story, and I'm too tired to hear it properly. The silence that followed felt different, softer around the edges. I listened as her breathing slowed and the cot creaked faintly when she shifted. Sleep didn't come easily for me. The image of her face, the raw fear, the quiet defiance, the way the river light had reflected in her eyes, stayed burned behind my eyelids. Out here, a man learned to expect little from the world. But sometimes, when the land grew quiet enough, it offered something back, a test, a chance, or maybe even a reason to keep going. That night, I had no idea which one Tao would prove to be. The river continued its roar outside, filling the cabin like the steady heartbeat of something ancient and larger than both of us. When dawn arrived, the world outside had transformed into a pale, frozen crust, brittle as thin glass. The river below still thundered, a restless brown force gnawing at its banks. It would be days before it settled. I rose early, brewed coffee so dark and strong it could rouse the dead, and watched the steam curl lazily against the frosted window. Ta remained asleep, bundled tightly in my old army blanket, her breathing now steady and peaceful. It struck me how much smaller the cabin felt with another living soul inside it, how the solitude I'd grown used to suddenly felt less like armor and more like absence. I stepped outside for more wood, the air biting deep, carrying the sharp sense of mud and thawing earth. When I returned, she was sitting up, watching the door as if she'd counted every second of my absence. You left, she said, voice edged with uncertainty. Just for firewood, I replied calmly. Didn't think you'd run off in this weather. Her gaze drifted toward the distant river. I would have if I could. Then maybe it's a good thing the water's still high. That earned a sharp, unreadable look from her. We shared a simple breakfast in near silence. Dried meat, leftover cornbread, and that heavy quiet that sometimes weighs more than spoken words. She held herself straight, as if even sitting required some invisible permission. Afterward I tended to chores while she observed from the chair, her eyes tracking my every movement with quiet intensity. You live alone most days? She asked eventually. Yeah. Had a couple hands once, but they moved on when the pay got thin. And before that? She pressed gently. Before that there was the war, I said simply, the words carrying the weight of memories I rarely shared. Her eyes dropped to her mug. War takes from everyone. That was the first real truth she offered that day, and it hung between us like a shared understanding. Over time, she found small ways to contribute around the cabin. She dried her dress thoroughly by the fire, braided her long hair with practiced care, and asked if she could help with tasks. You don't have to, I told her. I do, she insisted. Work keeps the heart steady. I led her. She mended the saddle strap with deft, careful hands. Later, she ventured outside briefly, gathering hardy herbs that had survived under rocky overhangs. She crushed them with a stone, mixing the paste with lard from a tin near the stove. What's that for? I asked, curious. Your horse, she replied. His leg is swollen. She was right. Buck had twisted his ankle a couple days earlier. I watched her work, her motion steady and precise, the scent of crushed sage filling the warm air. There was a quiet grace in how she moved, born not from softness but from years of enduring hardship and still choosing to stand tall. When she finished, she washed her hands in a bowl of melted snow and glanced around the cabin. "Your place is clean," she observed. "Too clean, like a man who doesn't expect visitors." "Guess I don't," I admitted. She studied me for a long moment. "Do you speak to God, Eli Mercer?" "Not much anymore. We had words once, but not since." Her lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Then we are alike." That evening, as the wind howled like a living beast against the walls, Tao sat near the hearth repairing the beadwork on her dress with a strand of horsehair. Her fingers moved quickly and surely. I poured coffee and handed her a cup. "You fixing to leave once the river drops?" Her eyes stayed on her work. "Maybe. I had a place once, but it no longer wants me." "Someone hurt you?" The question slipped out, heavy in the small space. She didn't look up. "Many tried. Some succeeded." I said nothing more. "Some pains run too deep for probing." After a pause, she asked, "Why did you save me?" I shrugged. "Didn't seem right to let anyone drown within sight of my land." "That is not a full answer," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It ain't." Later, as the fire burned low to glowing coals, she moved to the window, gazing into the stormy night. "Do men in your world ever forgive themselves?" The question caught me off guard. "Don't rightly know. Most don't even try." She nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "My mother used to say the river remembers everything, every word spoken, every sin committed. When it floods, it carries the past back to your door." I looked at her, shadows playing across her face. "Then I reckon we both live too close to it." Her lips curved in a half-smile, carrying both warmth and sorrow. The next morning brought clearer skies but biting cold. Steam rose from the river like departing spirits. I checked the horses while she prepared a simple meal from beans she'd found, the aroma filling the cabin like a small mercy after days of sparse fare. "Hope I didn't steal your supper," she said. "You call it stealing if it's feeding both of us? I learned long ago to ask first in this world. You don't have to ask here." Her hand paused on the spoon. "That's not what I'm used to hearing from men." We ate slowly, the clink of spoons against tin the only sound for a while. Then she spoke softly. "I was promised freedom once. But freedom inside a cage is still a cage." I met her eyes across the table. "You're free now?" "Am I?" she countered. "You don't know who's looking for me. Don't need to. You're here. That's enough for now." Her gaze sharpened. "You should know. It might save your life." I leaned back. "Lady, my life's been on borrowed time since '63. Just stay warm." Something subtle shifted between us then, like ice beginning to thaw on a frozen stream, small, quiet, but undeniable. That night, as the storm eased to a low moan from the river, sleep came slowly for both of us. My mind wandered to buried memories, smoke-filled fields, young voices calling for mothers, the metallic taste of fear and loss. In the quiet, I heard her whisper my name. "Yeah?" I responded. "Do you dream? Not the kind worth remembering." She was silent for a long stretch. "When I dream, I see water pulling me under. I keep swimming toward a man whose face I can't see." "Maybe that's just the river remembering," I said. "Maybe," she murmured, and her breathing finally evened out. 2 more days passed in that intimate, confined world of the cabin, firelight, wind, shared coffee, and growing comfort in the silence. It was no longer the tense quiet of strangers but the calm of two wounded souls learning not to flinch at every shadow. On the third morning, I found her outside gently tending to Buck, her hands wrapped in cloth as she brushed his coat with careful strokes. The usually ornery horse stood calm under her touch. "He likes you," I observed. She smiled faintly. "Horses listen better than men. They don't speak lies. In my people's tongue," she continued softly, "we call the horse brother. When a man forgets he is kin to what carries him, he loses part of his spirit. Guess there's a lot of lost spirits around here," I muttered. Her eyes met mine with fierce brightness. "Then find yours before it dies." The words struck deeper than I wanted to admit. That evening, we shared the last of the beans by the hearth as moonlight silvered the river outside. I pulled out my old harmonica, the one keepsake from my army days, and played a slow, haunting melody from a Tennessee evening long past. When I finished, she said softly, "That song sounds like home." "Where's home for you?" I asked. "Wherever the wind doesn't cut so deep." I had no reply, so I stayed silent. She turned to me fully then, her face open in the fire's glow. "Thank you, Eli, for not asking too much. You don't owe me thanks." "I know. That's why it matters." She rose and cracked the door open. Cool night air slipped in, scented with pine. She stood there gazing at the stars. "I used to believe spirits lived only in the mountains. Now I think they live in people, the good ones who don't run from pain." "Then you'll fit right in," I said quietly. She turned with a faint smile. "You think I will stay? I think the land decides who stays, not me." The fire cast our long shadows on the wall, two figures close but not quite touching, yet no longer drifting apart. For the first time in years, the cabin felt alive rather than empty. By the fifth day, the river's roar had softened to a murmur, its muddy color lightening. Spring's green promise lingered beneath the chill. Ta stood outside watching the current, her expression a mix of relief and quiet dread. When the waters receded enough to cross, choices would have to be made. I split logs nearby, pretending not to notice her gaze on the horizon. "You'll leave when it clears," I said at last. She tied her hair back and helped stack the wood. "You could stay," I added after a moment. She smiled slightly. "And what would I be here, Eli Mercer? A ghost in your cabin? I could use the company of a quiet ghost." That drew a real, low laugh from her. But before more could be said, Buck's ears pricked toward the ridge. A dust plume rose, one rider approaching fast. My stomach tightened. Visitors this far out rarely brought good news. "Ta, go inside," I said urgently. She hesitated only briefly before slipping into the cabin. I met the rider in the yard. It was Clay Danner, a man I knew from town, wearing a grin that hid trouble. "Eli Mercer," he called. "Thought you'd buried yourself up here for good." "You're a long way from Dry Creek," I replied flatly. He mentioned a notice from Tucson about a wanted Apache woman accused of theft and possibly worse. He asked if I'd seen anything unusual. I kept my face neutral. "Only logs and trouble, same as always," he pressed, mentioning a trader's sighting. I refused to let him search the property. Tension crackled between us as he referenced the war and my past. "Don't make me relearn old lessons," I warned quietly. He laughed it off but left with lingering suspicion, warning about secrets the river might wash up. Inside, Ta stood tense by the hearth. "He knows," she whispered. "He suspects," I corrected. She feared he'd return and bring danger to me. I pressed her gently for the truth. After a long pause, she told her story. A man named Boone who had worked with a prospector, accusations of stolen gold that didn't exist, threats that turned violent. She had fled, and the river nearly claimed her. "You believe me?" she asked. "Don't see a reason not to." For 2 nights, tension hung heavy as the river continued dropping. I scouted and saw riders gathering in town, including Danner and armed strangers. We packed essentials and fled to a hidden canyon north in the foothills, making camp under a protective rock shelf with a low fire. There, deeper conversations unfolded. She shared fragments of her life, her father's teachings about the stars, her mother's protections, the hardships endured. I spoke of my brother lost in the war and the ghosts I carried. She showed quiet vulnerability, and when she tested me with a question about staying even if she had nothing to give, I answered from the heart. The connection grew, built on respect and shared pain rather than demand. When pursuers closed in, I took a defensive position and fired warning shots, grazing one man to drive them off without unnecessary killing. I didn't need to end him, I explained later. If I start shooting every shadow, I'll never stop. In the quiet aftermath, we reflected. Boone was later dealt with by the law, his claims proven false. Freedom came not with fanfare but with a simple note and a chance to breathe. Back at the cabin, we settled into a rhythm of shared chores, quiet evenings, and mutual healing. Herbs grew by the door, fences were mended, and old Apache songs mixed with harmonica tunes. One evening, as copper light bathed the river, she asked if people could truly start over. I believed they could, by not letting old breaks define them forever. Her hand rested on my arm. "Maybe the reason for peace is standing right here." I brushed a strand of hair from her face, believing it too. That night under the stars, with the river murmuring peacefully below, the land felt like it was finally listening. We had both been pulled from dark waters, literal and otherwise, and found something worth staying for in each other. The cabin, once a place of solitude, became a home built on trust, quiet strength, and the kind of love that asks for nothing but offers everything that remains unbroken.